We're all very human and fallible, and yet we live in a society that rewards pretending we're not fallible, or the range of acceptable fallibility is narrow.
We are constantly comparing our insides to other people's outsides and feeling inadequate and guilty, even ashamed.
Trying to blend in means parts of ourselves must disappear, and we must then live in fear that we will be found out.
Here, together, we will create a space where we can laugh, cry, and carry our suffering and hurts lightly.
In the service of being deeply human.
This is Life's Dirty Little Secrets.
Welcome to Life's Dirty Little Secrets. I'm Emma Waddington.
And I'm Chris McCurry. And today we are thrilled and privileged to meet with Meg McKelvie. She is a licensed clinical psychologist in Boulder, Colorado. Meg earned her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Colorado, where she studied cognitive behavioral therapies and acceptance and commitment therapy, couples therapy, and research into those areas. Prior to her work in private practice, she was a psychologist in the family program at the Rocky Mountain VA healthcare system, where she specialized in developing, delivering, and evaluating compassionate, research-based treatments for distressed couples and couples where one partner is struggling with trauma. She's served as a nationally recognized consultant, a trainer in cognitive processing therapy, a CBT for trauma for the Veterans Affairs Healthcare System, and local supervisor for doctoral level trainees. And she has specialized in CBT, ACT, and couples therapy and research for over 18 years and reproductive mental health for 15 years. She's particularly interested in our innate yearning to belong, which is our topic for today, and how to increase folks' sense of belonging and interconnection, especially for people who have been made to feel other. So welcome, Meg.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you here. The idea of belonging, it's so deeply ingrained in our DNA, in our evolution as a human species. And yet it's so hard for people to sometimes acknowledge that they need it and they're lonely and something needs to shift. So, why is it so hard for people to address this in their lives?
Well, I think fundamentally, there's a lot of different facets of belonging. And I think the first part is really understanding what the yearning to belong is and what all the different facets are of belonging. And some of it is actually, I think, hard to put to words and hard to tease apart. So that is sort of, I think, one of the challenges is, what does it mean to feel belonging? There's the societal belonging of feeling part of a group. There's the, feeling part of a family, having friends that we feel seen. And then there's also a sense of belonging that is more internal, or a sense of self-acceptance or embodiment, comfortableness in our bodies. And then there's also sort of belonging from a more transcendental or spiritual lens, where we would sort of more of a wordless experience, pure awareness or self as context, where we're the part of ourselves that is noticing, is able to not be, is sort of unfettered by kind of the ups and downs of life, and is able to notice whatever is present without getting sort of too sucked into it.
Sort of a mindfulness.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So there's just all these different layers of belonging. And I think when we use the word belonging, it sort of hits different aspects or facets of it for different people and different times. And I think that's an interesting part of this conversation, is there's so many ways in to having this conversation. There's so many aspects of this to touch on. It feels really expansive and also a lot.
I must say, I didn't realize there was 3 ways to define belonging. I've always thought of belonging in terms of feeling a part of something. But now that something being a group or a community, but I didn't think of it from either of those other two lenses, belonging within ourselves and belonging from a more spiritual, transcendental perspective. And I think what I really like about having this more expansive is that, is it possible to feel a sense of belonging? Does it matter which one? Or do we need to feel a sense of belonging across all three? Hey, listeners, we're Emma
And Chris.
and we're excited to share our new children workbooks. Just in Case Sits with Anxiety follows Justin on his first babysitting job and a case of the what ifs. The Glum twins unhooked from sadness tells the story of Dolores and Tristan as birthday plans go off the rails.
Both books are designed for kids ages 8 to 12 and are packed with playful, hands-on activities based on acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. They help kids understand that emotions like anxiety and sadness are totally normal, and that we don't have to let them stop us from doing what matters. Each book also includes a special section for parents and caregivers on how to support kids through tough emotional moments. They're fun, evidence-based, and full of heart.
Know a kid facing tough feelings of anxiety or sadness? These books are for them. Available now in bookstores and online. Thank you all for your support.
You know, that's such an interesting question. Yeah. You know, what I would say is, I think perhaps it's important to really bring compassionate awareness to ourselves and our sense of belonging and explore that. I sort of explore, you know, how, like a temperature check on sort of how is my sense of belonging in terms of groups and communities and families. How is it that I feel, you know, where is my sense of belonging in myself? How do I feel a sense of calm and peace in my body? And then also sort of how is my relationship spiritually, or the transcendental or pure awareness part of my sense of belonging? Do I have connection? Do I have a way to connect with that part of belonging through different practices or time in nature, those kinds of things? So I think that's sort of the take home for me after so much of diving into this, is really trying to understand where we are and trying to understand what challenges we face in terms of our own sense of belonging. Where do we, you know, and that our lives are constantly changing. And, you know, we may feel a sense of belonging today, and then, you know, our closest friends may move away, or our partner dies, or we may, you know, experience some extreme loss or something like that. And so a sense of belonging is always a moving target. And there's not some kind of end to it where we like achieve it or finally master it. It's a constant dance of really understanding our own longing to belong.
So is it possible to feel a sense of belonging in ourselves, but not belong to a community?
So that's in some ways where I started getting really interested in belonging, is that I think a lot of times we associate belonging with groups and being part of groups. Yeah. And I think what I came to understand through my own work and through learning all about belonging was that there is a practice of learning how to belong from the inside out. And that can really then help us belong out into the world.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I just love this. Is it? Yeah, it's like, do you think we need to start there? Like, I sometimes in my client work, but even with myself. I'm a third culture kid. And so I moved around a lot as a child. So belonging was always a big deal because I moved. We shifted communities. We moved to countries where I spoke different language. Sometimes I looked a bit different. And so belonging really was, the lack of belonging became a big part of what I sought, what I looked for. And what I realized was that I kind of became very good at adapting and becoming a bit of a chameleon. And I even, somebody said to me, "You sound so American when you speak on this podcast." That's one of my skills, is that, my accent can change depending on who I speak to. And I don't know if I sound so American, but anyway, the point being is that, I notice that I adapt my thinking, my way of being. And with age, I've come to recognize that as, perhaps something useful and sometimes something that denies who I am. But the need was to feel a part of something, and that somehow I wasn't a part of the group and the community that I was supposedly belonging to. And so is that inside out work sort of really important to help me to know where I belong? And that's the kind of journey I've come on, decades later, to recognize that, knowing who I am, what's important, what my values are. We talk about that a lot on the podcast. What I stand for, what I care about, helps me to feel a sense of belonging, having that clarity within myself, but also to know what I want to belong to.
What comes to my mind as you're talking is this concept of that we all have a birthright to belong. And it reminds me, one of the images that helps me really understand belonging and more of the wordless experience of it is imagining yourself as a baby, and you've just been born and your caregiver is holding you to their chest, and just imagining sort of your soft hair and your tiny fingers and, the curve of the heel of the baby, of a beautiful baby. And just that when we are born, there's nothing that we have to earn. We truly belong. And, caregiver doesn't say, "Oh, they're so smart and that's why I love them," or, "Oh, they are so handsome, that's why I love them." And so I think in many ways what we're talking about with belonging is how to come back to some of that, where what happens out there in the world we become sort of more unfettered by that. That's fundamentally, we have a birthright to belong, and we don't have to earn that. And that is something that if we can really touch into for ourselves, can help us reorient to this birthright and look at the ways that we try to earn it. And that fundamentally, we all have ways that we try to earn love and belonging. And how do we notice what they are and see if we can let go of some of those strategies, become more aware of that? So it's not to say, I'll leave it there.
So it's not an achievement. It's not
That's
something
right.
we have to, necessarily work at, because that can actually be counterproductive, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I've worked with so many kids that, they're very socially anxious and they just try too hard, in their social groups, and it's very off-putting.
Yeah.
You actually have to coach them on doing less and trusting more, which is hard. It's hard to
Yeah.
trust, particularly if I've got a lot of self-stories about how inadequate I am. And I love the way you talk about stepping around those self-stories. I really like that image of, not having to get rid of it, but just step around it,
Yes, that kind of instead of debating with ourselves, are we good or are we not good, or are we smart or are we attractive? Just seeing if there is a way to tap into that birthright to belong and not have to get into that debate. So some of it is, there's a way in which we, as our culture, put so much on self-improvement and, even in sort of what seems like a good way, right? The three of us probably all share that of like trying to do things to be our best selves. And I think some of this work really can free up people to let go of some of that and truly accept that no matter what, we still deserve love and belonging. And I think that's like almost countercultural sometimes
Really
lately.
is. This is kind of blowing my mind a bit. It's kind of thrown the idea of belonging. It's turned it on its head. So I have always thought about, I talk to my clients about finding your tribe and finding a community that speaks your language, not literally, but in terms of your values. But I can see how we put belonging into the hands of others. In that if we do that, we're saying, I only belong if ... I speak like them, I look like them, I value what they do. So what I'm hearing is that others don't decide whether we belong. We decide, or the power is in ourselves. So why do we need others?
Well, I think that we move from that space, right? You were asking earlier, do we need all these aspects of belonging? And so maybe that's what we're getting at, is like, maybe what we're talking about is this tension in our culture of wanting to focus on the outward. So like I think about it, so belonging from the inside out, belonging from the outside in, or, there's these different aspects of belonging. And maybe what I'm kind of pointing to is that we can do this belonging work for ourselves first. And then when we go out there and seek that connection that is truly, part of our biology, we need that social connection. We will have a different way that we will show up with other people and part of it is that we're remembering. It's this process of reconnecting with our belonging and constantly trying to understand our sense of belonging as a tuning fork or a healthy signal that helps us get what we need in our lives.
So when we seek out belonging in a wider circle, there's a healthier tone to it, or a different quality to it, less desperate, less needy, whatever that may be, if I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah, or even just like more specific, right? It's like it when we tap into and understand the yearning to belong as a signal rather than a flag of our shame, we can then really bring compassionate curiosity to that. And it will help lead us to what it is that we need. So for example, we can tune into, do I need to go and sing with people because I want to feel that type of resonance with a group? Do I want to hike with someone individually? Do I want to, join a supper club? Like, do I want to have more meaningful conversations? Do I want to play with people, right? Do I want to do pickleball because I want that playing aspect to be in my field and my relationships. Like, so there's perhaps like, do I not have enough close in friends? Do I have too many acquaintances? Like, just sort of all these questions. Do I have all these friends that I feel close to, but I don't really share my heart with? So perhaps it's just about gaining some really putting our ear to the ground about what it is that we need. And when we get sort of stuck in the shame of feeling that we don't belong, we can't actually tune into the signal. It becomes sort of fuzzy.
I like that. So actually, when I think about I don't belong, you're absolutely right. There is that shame of what's wrong with me, that I don't fit in, like fitting in and belonging. Brené Brown had a, where did I put this quote? She's got a quote about this. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. The difference between belonging and fitting in, where fitting in means adapting yourself to be accepted. True belonging comes when you show up as your authentic self and are still accepted.
Yeah.
So true. I think then that's what you're speaking to, the sense that, we can't, there's too much noise when we're trying to fit in. A bit like what I was saying earlier on, like my childhood was a lot about fitting in and trying to be a part of a community because it is so scary and so threatening. And I think that's the kind of monkey we are. We are, we want to have a group. We feel safer in a group, but we can deny ourselves by trying to fit in and not listening.
Well, that reminds me of something Steve Hayes used to say, back when I was learning ACT. He'd say, we can't put our clients in the untenable position of having to change in order to change.
I love it.
So, we got to start where you are, which I think is the name of a Pema Chodron book.
It sounds so much easier than it actually is. Like sometimes I think,
how do we actually do this? But go ahead, finish your thought, Emma.
No, let's do that part because I think as clinicians, we throw these around.
I need a map.
Yeah, it's really hard. So how do we start where we are?
Well, I think the primary place to start is with this shared humanity, right? That actually our yearning to belong is evolutionarily wired. It's like hunger or thirst. And that it is, I think it's, when I read Stephen Hayes's chapter on belonging, I want to point everybody to that as well, because this is such a rich chapter that really got me thinking.
And remind our listeners what book that's from.
That's in the A Liberated Mind. Yes.
Got it.
So as a contextual behavioral therapist, belonging to me is so brilliant because this framework is sort of a way to fundamentally contextualize some of our deepest shame and our deepest fears, right? Like that this yearning to belong is actually what connects us to all of humanity. And so when we look at people's behaviors from this lens, I see it in my therapy room where it almost sort of melts people into the chair, where it's like, oh, that's why I do all of this toxic striving, or, oh, that's why I have to look a certain way, or, oh, that's why I spend so much time trying to look good, or whatever it is that their behavior it is that they struggle with, this sort of what we might describe as trying to earn their love and belonging, or what is also called mismanaged yearning to belong. When they understand it from this lens, to me, I'm like, oh, this is so brilliant. Like Stephen Hayes it's like the ultimate contextual framework where then you can sort of relax into the empathy of like, of course, this is what I do. Of course I want to belong. And these are all the ways that the culture that that acceptable to try to belong. And so I think that that is sort of one of the ways to begin is with this evolutionary perspective, with understanding and bringing compassionate awareness to what is our relationship with belonging and what are the ways in which we try to earn our love and belonging, and looking at sort of that mismanaged belonging such that what we want to do is allow the belonging to do its good work and not get sort of derailed, so to speak. So our yearning to belong that's gotten derailed by trying to achieve. Now, there's nothing wrong. We just kind of want to get it kind of back to doing its good work, pulling us towards what it is that is mattering to us. That would be where I would begin, is just really an inquiry.
I love that. And so the curiosity comes with that moment where you don't feel like you belong. And being curious instead of, the default, which may be a criticism, what's wrong with me? What do I need to work harder at? Why am I not, as smart, or whatever it is that might be driving some of that shame? It's going, well, belonging is a normal human need. It's a natural human need, connects me to everybody else. What's happening here for me? And so when we are feeling a lack of belonging, well, how would it show up? So obviously there's a shame. What else happens? What other feelings can be cues?
I think that's a really good question.
So I'm wondering if that's also useful, because shame is really loud, isn't it?
Well, it could be jealousy, there could be resentment, there could be sort of a sour grapes kind of thing. Well, I didn't want to be part of, sort of like Groucho Marx, I wouldn't want to be part of a group, a club that would have me as a member. It's like, well, to heck with them then if they're not going to include me. So yeah, it could manifest in all kinds of ways.
Absolutely. I think what comes to my mind is just looking at self-story and how it might tie into belonging, right? Like, I have to be special to be loved. I'm fragile. I'm the only one. I'm a victim. I have to be the best. I can't handle this. I'm uniquely messed up. I'm not good enough. I'm in need of great care. So, I think so many of our self-story, if we kind of go down and, well, what would that mean about you? And what would that mean about you? And what would that mean about you? I generally find that a lot of the roads lead to belonging. So you're sort of looking at where are the stuck points that someone shows up with, and is there some flavor of belonging there, of yearning to belong there?
So I can imagine that when you do the deep dive, it sounds easier than it actually is. To start with, these self stories can be really loud, and then being able to follow the road deep inside of us can take some work. Obviously, with therapy, that's, one of the avenues, but even on our own, maybe through journaling, through writing, through just being curious, but being very courageous and brave to go, what's under that? What is it that, I make that me? What does that say about me? And I imagine, within that inquiry, we get sadness. We get, that sense of loss, that sense of rejection. And perhaps when we get there, what do we then do with that?
Well, I think we just, like we would from an ACT perspective, we want to hold the pain and bring compassion to it, and then work to understand what is that telling us about what matters to us and what is really mattering inside these, this belonging pain, right? Like, it's pointing us back to, gosh, it really matters to me to belong, to be part of a group, to feel connected to myself inside my body. So there is really just this just like ACT would talk about, just a connection between the pain and values around belonging.
I know you've talked about some exercises that can get people in touch with this, the free writing and expressive writing. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So I think that one of the things that can be really helpful is one of the mediums is reading poetry and and then doing some, I find that reading poetry can connect us to the sort of the cloth of our humanity so that we don't feel so alone in our experience. If someone, of a different culture and a different time is speaking about belonging in their poetry, to be able to read that and then maybe use that as a prompt to write about our own experience around belonging. And that, sometimes writing in groups, taking writing classes, or, reading our writing aloud. There's all kinds of different mediums for that. But I think overall, we're tapping into our own kind of feelings around belonging potentially, but then we're also potentially doing this in groups and connecting to literature, memoir, poetry, that often there are themes there of the yearning to belong and maybe feeling like we don't belong in moments.
And again, that common humanity where people have been talking about these very issues, these themes for, thousands of years, really.
Yeah. And really, there's so many different practices that we can do to connect with our own sense of belonging. Just even, some of the being in nature, is something that I think we touched on earlier. And that I was remembering this article that I read about how birds have a lot to do. Listening to bird song can really help our mental health. And I was thinking about how that relates to belonging. And what if I sort of was having this fantasy of like, what if bird song and listening to birds is actually a proxy for some like wordless experience that we have when we go into nature of feeling a part of the cloth of nature, and that the birds remind us of our connection, that we are connected in nature. We are part of nature. We are an animal just like the bird. And so, other practices like yoga and meditation and finding ways, body center practices like Tai Chi, coming back into the body where we reconnect with our natural goodness, our birthright to belong, our, pure awareness, these kind of broader experiences of wordless belonging that is less about what is around us and more about what's happening inside of us.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of, all those practices, listening to the birds, being out with nature, take us away from the content of our minds.
Yeah.
Would seduce us into these narratives about us and them, judgments. And so it sounds like how we come to belong requires us to step outside, like you said, outside of our self stories, but that our minds, aren't always our friends and don't always tell us the answer, don't always point us to the right direction. That sometimes it does. Sometimes our minds are useful, but sometimes, they talk to us about difference and rejection and threat, and that can really get in the way of the sense of belonging.
Absolutely. And that, from an RFT and ACT perspective, it's the languaging, like you're saying, that can really get in the way. And I think perhaps for me, that's why the experience of reconnecting with the baby before language, that part of ourselves that has always been there, that is unfettered by the languaging that can cause us so much suffering, sort of all the debates and the back and the forth and the am I good, am I not good? And that there is something outside of language. And when we can reconnect with that and our natural goodness and our birthright to belong that is wordless, we can step outside of the suffering of language.
Some of that language can be used to distance ourselves from other people to say, well, they're not worthy or they're different. I mean, we're seeing that a lot these days, where our common humanity is getting, discouraged even politically and what have you. And then that undermines our sense of belonging, and it undermines our compassion for other people, and it undermines social justice, and the ramifications are quite severe sometimes.
Absolutely. And, I think that brings us to sort of this idea of belonging work as sort of a radical act of social justice and how when we bring that in with our clients and ourselves, none of us belong if other people feel that they don't belong. And so one thing that can be really powerful, and one thing that I found, is that what happens when you go out into the world and work towards helping other people feel that they belong, or creating a sense of belongingness for others, and how might that impact your sense of belonging? So, for example, I volunteer teaching adaptive skiing to people with disabilities. And so when I go there and I'm working towards inclusiveness and belonging for other people, it's actually one of the places that I myself feel the most belonging. And so that's something to really also keep in mind, is that when we do this work to break down barriers for marginalized communities, or to help connect other people with a sense of belonging, that it actually surprisingly may help us feel that we belong as well.
I just thought it's so beautiful and so radical, this idea that, if others don't feel that they belong, then we won't feel a sense of belonging. And actually nurturing other people's sense of belonging will ultimately bring our own sense of belonging. And like the ultimate act of belonging is to help others. It feels very moving and very beautiful and counterintuitive, like so many of the powerful movements are, and an incredible invitation for us as humans. Like, I think that, it's the ultimate goal to cultivate a sense of belonging as a species. Like we talked about that with our previous guest, as a species, and even when he was talking about even within the animal kingdom and within nature, like, is that the ultimate goal, to be able to cultivate that sense that we belong? We don't need a group. We belong as a species. And yeah, it's obviously an incredibly difficult thing for us to do as humans.
It's very timely work, and it gets us outside of ourselves once again, right? When you move into a space and you are noticing, is there someone here who's new? And might I approach them and invite them in and notice who needs to be brought into the fold? It's a powerful and subtle practice that can really focus our attention outwards and have benefits for all.
Wow.
Wonderful.
I love that. Really beautiful.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Meg McKelvie. We will have links to your websites in our show notes, as well as a couple of books. And we will look forward to the book that you have to write about this, because it would be of great benefit to so many people. And it's certainly something that you speak to with eloquence and compassion.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a delight to talk with you both.
Thanks so much for tuning into the Life's Dirty Little Secrets podcast.
If you have any feedback for us or secrets for future episodes,
You can email us at lifesdirtylittlesecretspodcast@gmail.com.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Life's Dirty Little Secrets or on Facebook at Life's Dirty Little Secrets Podcast.
We invite you to follow, rate, and review us on wherever you listen to this podcast. It is the best way to get our podcast out in front of new listeners.
We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more.
See you then.